Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, infamous spy Jonathan Pollard arrives in Israel a free man. Meanwhile, coronavirus lockdown restrictions are slightly eased, and we take a look at some predictions for the coming year. Starting off tonight with a very long-awaited homecoming, the infamous Jonathan Pollard and his wife Esther starting a new life in Israel Wednesday morning. An emotional arrival. New immigrants to Israel, aka Olim, Jonathan Pollard and his wife Esther, kissing the Israeli ground upon touchdown, as so many other Olim do. They even kept Prime Minister Netanyahu waiting to do so. But unlike many others, the Pollards' landing at Ben Gurion Airport also marks one of the first truly free moments that Jonathan has enjoyed in several decades, following his imprisonment over charges of conspiracy to commit espionage.
We are ecstatic to be home at last, after 35 years. And we thank the people and the Prime Minister of Israel for bringing us home. No one could be prouder of this country or this leader than we are. And we hope to become productive citizens as soon and as quickly as possible to get on with our lives here. This is a wonderful country. It has a tremendous future. It is the future of the Jewish people, and we're not going anywhere. So thank you, profoundly thank you very much.
Thank you. Get some rest.
A former U.S. Navy analyst, Pollard was convicted in 1987 after pleading guilty to charges of passing American military intelligence onto the Israelis. The scandal causing a decades-long rift between the United States and Israel, and Pollard's sentencing being life in prison with chance for parole. Well, in 2015, after nearly 30 years in prison and extensive efforts to free him, Pollard was granted that parole, just under strict conditions, including wearing an ankle monitor, a ban from certain computer use, a daily evening curfew, and a ban on travel. That said, Pollard's parole has since been lifted, and his 5-year ban on travel was also now allowed to go unrenewed, in a move seen by some as a parting gift from the Trump administration, especially as the now 66-year-old Pollard has often spoken of his Zionism and his ambitions to move to Israel. As for Israel, authorities are happy to receive them, Prime Minister Netanyahu having expressed his intentions to help the Pollards months ago. In fact, the flight was a private one owned by Netanyahu's American billionaire friends, the Adelsons, allegedly due to Esther's cancer-caused health concerns. And as they arrived, Netanyahu personally greeted them, handed them their new ID cards, and blessed their coming home.
זה רגע מרגש נורא שיונתן ואסתר הם בבית, חזרו הביתה, כמה טוב שהם באו הביתה. על זה אומרים שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Finally, as for what comes next, the Pollards will now remain in quarantine in a Jerusalem apartment that's been fully furnished and prepared ahead of their arrival. In other news, to Israel's north, Syrian news agencies reporting at least 1 killed and 3 others injured in an allegedly Israeli missile strike against military installations outside of Damascus. Syrian military sources adding that air defenses intercepted some of the missiles, but not enough to prevent the damages. Targets reportedly including sites belonging to forces from Iran and Iranian proxy terror group Hezbollah. And this just days before the anniversary of the assassination of IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani, and days after Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah repeated threats against Israel for the killing of Hezbollah and Iranian operatives in Syria earlier this year. This also comes after a strike last week that was likewise attributed to Israel, in which several Iranian militant barracks, missile depots, and missile production facilities were destroyed. Meanwhile, earlier in the day, IDF troops reported an attempted infiltration from neighboring Lebanon. The soldiers apparently firing into the air as one of the suspects crossed a few meters into Israeli territory before then retreating back over the border. No further infiltrations were reported. Now moving on, good news continuing on the coronavirus front. Israelis celebrating the official vaccination of over 500,000 citizens. Chana Rifkin reporting.
Israel's top government and health authorities struggling to contain their joy as they hail the historic vaccination of over 500,000 people against COVID-19.
קודם כל אני רוצה לברך את דוד הרצל ואת פדירה לוי, שהם המתחסנים ה-500,000 ו-500,001, וזה מחמם את הלב לראות את אזרחי ישראל נרתמים כדי לעזור לאזרחי ישראל, ובראש ובראשונה למבוגרים יותר שיוצאים מאפלה גדולה לאור גדול.
And to that end, as of Wednesday morning, another 150,000 people were added to the list, bringing the total number of vaccinated Israelis up to nearly 650,000. Health Minister Yuli Edelstein announcing the news on Twitter. Of course, while the battle may still be waning, it's still far from over.
לצד זה, חברים, אני לא אסתיר שאנחנו בעלייה מטורפת בתחלואה, ואני מבקש מכולנו לגלות אחריות. רק כך נוכל להמשיך ולסיים בהצלחה את המבצע המדהים הזה של חיסוני הקורונה.
New infections in Israel now bringing the active total of sick to roughly 41,000, over 600 in serious condition, and the death toll just shy of 3,300. On the other hand, many public health experts are still criticizing the newest lockdown measures, arguing that they will fail to slow the spread of the virus to the extent that the government hopes. And to some degree, Edelstein himself seems to agree that a more targeted approach is warranted.
אנחנו מקילים איפה שאפשר. אנחנו קיבלנו גם היום בישיבה, לאחר דיון לא פשוט, את הסיום של בידוד חובה במלונית. נמליץ לקבינט הקורונה, לראש הממשלה על הנושא הזה, אבל זה עדיין לא אומר שמי שצריך להיות בבידוד יכול להפר את הבידוד.
Meanwhile, in addition to easing isolation orders, the health ministry is in works to form an outline that would allow foreign tourists to return to the country by April 2021, albeit most likely under strict conditions. And this as Finance Minister Yisrael Katz pushes to ease more domestic suffering by hopefully allowing Israeli eateries to resume the sale of takeout orders in addition to just delivery.
Now, for more news, visit our new and improved website at ILTV.tv and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for daily updates. But now, meanwhile, it seems that despite the new coronavirus mutation and shutdowns, Israel is waking up to a new change in the aviation market. Israeli supermarket entrepreneur Rami Levy winning in his bid to buy the controlling stake of Israel Airlines. And joining us now to talk about it is Dr. Alex Coleman, value creation expert. Dr. Coleman, thanks so much for being with us. Now, why did Rami Levy, a supermarket mogul, decide to go and buy an airline?
Well, Rami Levy is the low-cost mogul in Israel. So he sells the cheapest products, and now he has a fantastic deal. He can buy Israel at discount prices because, A, Israel is in big trouble because of the COVID-19 problem. And also Israel is in trouble because of the airport, Sde Dov, where it used to fly to Eilat, this airport was closed. And so the amount of flights was reduced dramatically. So Rami Levy cannot give up on a fantastic deal, and so he's going for it.
Well, and so how is this going to change the aviation market in Israel overall, especially the local market?
Well, in Israel, we right now have three companies. The biggest one is El Al, and then we have two small ones, Israel and Arkia. I believe that conditions that happened will only enable two companies to actually survive. So I would assume that one of the two small ones, either Arkia or Israel, would eventually be merged into one of the others. So I would assume that Rami Levy is not such a big airline mogul, and he's not a big expert on this domain. He doesn't understand pilots and safety criteria and airplane models, etc. So my assumption is that eventually either he plans on selling Israel at a good price to El Al or to Arkia, or buying Arkia and basically there will be consolidation from three companies into two.
Well, so, could we maybe extrapolate a little bit further and see if there are any other changes that we might forecast in the future to the aviation industry? Because, of course, we also know that El Al was recently, also reworked into the government in some ways.
Well, that's something that's ironic in the sense that you see people who know nothing about airlines buying airline companies. I personally am a great believer in competency and professionalism. So when somebody like Rami Levy, he's the king of retail because he knows how much carrot he has in every store. If I think about Sami Segol, who is Israel's mogul in plastic manufacturing, he's full with knowledge. When one of these people goes into airlines, suddenly they find themselves in an area that they know nothing about. So El Al was acquired by somebody who made a lot of money in real estate in the United States. So he's not familiar with airlines. He's not familiar with Israel. His rabbi told him to buy that. And Rami Levy is a similar example. Rami Levy is fantastic at selling you a chicken for 1 shekel, so you buy other products. And I see very little synergies how he would eventually accumulate your acquisitions in the supermarket to get discounts for the airline. So I'm not for people who are like Leonardo da Vinci, Renaissance people who understand retail and airlines, etc. I don't believe in that. So eventually I think it would end with tears.
All right, well, I hate to go against your prediction, but I certainly hope that Israel's airfare does not end in a tearful situation. But until we find out, Alex Coleman, thank you so much. All right, moving on to politics. Tel Aviv Mayor Ron Huldai has now officially named his newly formed party in the coming 2021 elections as HaYisraelim, or the Israelis. And this just before going on to introduce his new number 2 as Avi Nissencohn, the former justice minister, formerly of Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party. But of course, this is just one of several recent changes to the Israeli political lineup. And joining me now to help us navigate these changes is Mark Schulman, Newsweek columnist and editor of HistoryCentral.com. Mark, thanks so much for being with us. Now, how do you see this move by Ron Huldai? How do you view this?
I view it in a positive sense, and people say, well, there are too many parties on the left, but there really aren't. We have to assume the fact that the Labour Party is dead. Its name is not, the Motag, the name Labour Party is really not worth very much at this point, even though it has a long history. Huldai is a son of the Labour Party. He came out of kibbutz. He was Labour Party's candidate for mayor of Tel Aviv for many times, but the Labour Party has died. Its coffin was sealed by Amir Peretz when he joined the last coalition. Blue and White is dead. I can't imagine who is possibly going to vote for Blue and White at this point in Benny Gantz. He has no natural constituency whatsoever at this point. So what you're left with is Yesh Atid, which has always never wanted to be considered left. Yair Lapid keeps on saying he's center right. He's worked very hard at that. Meretz, which doesn't seem to be able to get off the ground, has never managed for 20 years to break the 6 or 7 Knesset members. It does not have any sort of tremendous leadership at the moment. Nitzan Horowitz is competent, but he's not a charismatic leader, and I can't imagine that he's going to be able to break through with Meretz. So you have a big void there, which is waiting to be filled with someone whose ideology is similar to the old line Labor without some of the baggage that the Labor Party brought to it, with clear views. Now, as a quick survey of people I know in Tel Aviv in the last 12 hours, every single person I know is planning to vote for Huldai now. Yes, Tel Aviv is left center, generally speaking, sure. But the general sense is Huldai is not loved by a lot of people, but he's considered incredibly competent.
Well, so how is he going to shake up the balance of power with a lot of these new parties? Because you mentioned, of course, that Meretz, Labor, and Blue and White are, dead or barely passing the electoral threshold. But then you also have Gideon Sa'ar's New Hope Party. You have Yesh Atid, which you mentioned, which is reportedly in talks with Tzipi Livni's Hatnuah Party to bring her back into politics. How is the balance of power being shifted?
Well, two things. First of all, I think he's going to bring back people from Gideon Sa'ar's party and from Naftali Bennett's party. Both of those people have gotten votes, at least according, not votes, but in the opinion polls, based on two things. Number one, they weren't going to go in with Netanyahu, a little bit less so with Bennett, but certainly Sa'ar. And clearly, Huldai is not going to go with Netanyahu. And both of them have projected a certain level of competence. Certainly, Bennett has been projecting competence. Huldai is extremely competent and extreme experience. I mean, on every level. Huldai was a fighter pilot, was a commander of Israel's largest Air Force base, took a high school that was failing and was a high school principal for a couple of years, and now for 22 years he's run Tel Aviv almost like a dictator, and that's why he's not always that popular, but no one questions the fact that Tel Aviv has flourished under his rule.
Well, do you see him as a prime minister candidate?
Well, it's going to be a bit of a jump to get that far. I'm sure he sees himself as a prime minister candidate. He's certainly capable of being the prime minister. It depends on what happens with everybody else. Are other people going to get on the bandwagon? At this point, even though there's talk about Tzipi Livni joining with Yesh Atid, I would not be surprised if we find her joining with Khudai. I mean, I'm not sure what their personal relations are. Khudai's had fights with many people over the years, but if he can get Tzipi Livni and maybe bring some other, people like Stav Shafir into the fold, and bring a group of people who are really enthusiastic and show competence, I think he has a chance of gaining a certain momentum. We don't really know, obviously. But look, all of Saar's gains and all of Bennett's gains in the polls were all because the people were looking for someplace other than Bibi. The other Bibi votes had no place to go after blue and white came apart. And both Saar and Bennett seem competent. Khudai is competent.
Well, we'll see if all these, newly independent voters will find a new home with the Israelis.
What can I say?
Yeah.
They keep us interesting. We won't know what's going to happen, and we'll find out in 3 months.
As always, the coming elections are a mystery to us all. Mark Schulman, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And moving on, as anti-Semitism and Jew hatred still plague our world, a new grassroots movement in North America, creatively named End Jew Hatred, has declared itself as centering on Jewish liberation from all forms of oppression and discrimination in Western culture through peaceful, direct action and education. But joining us now to delve a little deeper into this movement is attorney Brook Goldstein, founder and executive director of the Lawfare Project. Brook, thank you so much for being with us. Why do we need a Jewish grassroots movement for this?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the answer is simple. There has never been a Jewish civil rights movement in the West. We are the oldest, most persecuted minority community in the world. Jews have been at the forefront of civil rights movements for other minorities, Jews for LGBTQ, Jews for Black Lives Matter, and yet never have we had a movement which is Jews for Jews. And as you mentioned in your intro, Jew hatred is rising once again, and the time is now to seize on what we see as an opportunity where minority rights movements are creating seismic shifts in the way the public deals with them. And so we demand an end to Jew hatred in this generation. What does that mean? It means that Jew hatred will no longer be tolerable in the public space, and there will be social consequences for Jew hatred, like there is for hatred and discrimination against other minority communities.
All right, well, so I mentioned earlier that, of course, the mission statement of the End Jew Hatred movement is, of course, to educate the population and with direct action. Can you expand a little bit about what that will entail?
Absolutely. So up until now, a lot of Jewish advocacy is centered around defending ourselves against the accusations of the other. What End Jew Hatred seeks to do is recenter Jewish advocacy around civil rights, around the basic fact that Jews, again, are a minority community and deserve equal protection under the law. And what that means is not only grassroots advocacy, mobilizing the Jewish community, training new leaders in civil rights advocacy, but also engaging in direct actions that ensure there are consequences for Jew hatred. So what do we mean by this? We've had so far, I think we're just about 2.5 months old. There are over a dozen organizations involved. There are dozens of grassroots activists and social media influencers who have all gotten together to pick particular individuals or entities such as Zoom who are tolerating Jew hatred and ensure there are consequences. We organized a protest of hundreds of people to show up outside of Zoom headquarters, and were successful in deplatforming the notorious terrorist Leila Khaled, who is then canceled from Facebook and YouTube. Over 100 people gathered outside the Grove in LA to protest Jew hatred at USC, which then opened up a dialogue with Rick Caruso, who's the chairman of the board as well. And further actions are planned. Again, the point is to ensure there are social consequences for Jew hatred and that it's no longer tolerable in the West.
Well, it sounds like...
Or elsewhere, or anywhere.
Well, it sounds like you're already off to a very good start. Good luck in the future. Brook Goldstein, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, now on a lighter note, legal battles on behalf of Israeli civil marriage rights are getting a leg up with some interesting new precedents. For the first time ever, the Interior Ministry has officially recognized 3 civil marriages performed entirely online. But weirder still, all 3 civil unions were performed through the U.S. state of Utah and without the Israeli citizens ever having left the country. Under normal circumstances, Israelis interested in civil marriages would have to leave the country and get married abroad where civil unions are allowed, and then return to Israel with an apostille document. New couples can then get Israel to recognize the marriage. But with coronavirus grounding nearly all travels, thousands of Israelis have been stuck in limbo with no way to marry through the rabbinate nor through non-existent Israeli civil procedures. And this is where things get interesting, because aside from now leading to another push for domestic civil union rights, this could set a precedent that would force the government to approve such procedures in the future. That said, for now, Interior Minister Aryeh Deri has instructed the government to stop dealing with these requests until a legal review is conducted. In other news, with the end of the year ahead, the Israeli Defense Forces are showing the world some beautiful highlights from 2020 in its annual photography contest. And with 16,000 votes received, here are the winning top 5. Coming in at 5th place is Yoav Klein's photo entitled Walnut, depicting 2 soldiers from the Oketz K9 unit. Next, in 4th place, Tamar Shemtov's Training for the Rescue Brigade, showing a soldier cutting through debris. Then in 3rd, an emotional moment captured by Lev Arpishkin, the swearing-in ceremony for new Golani Brigade fighters who were injured just before in a February terror attack at their Jerusalem training compound. And then finally, taking both 1st and 2nd place out of some 20 different submissions is photographer Amit Argonov, with this incredible shot of Unit 669 soldiers training in the Sea of Galilee coming in 2nd, and this dramatic image of Unit 669 soldiers in another exercise coming in 1st. Finally, as we get closer and closer to the new year, some unfortunate predictions from centuries past are coming to light. The popular hatred for the whole of last year finally turning to hope ahead of New Year's 2021. But don't get too excited just yet, as the famed French Jewish philosopher Nostradamus returns to reign on our collective parades from over 400 years ago. His 6,338 prophecies extending all the way into the year 3797, with over 70% of them already allegedly fulfilled, like JFK and Bobby Kennedy's assassinations, Hitler's rise to power, or even his own death. And let's just say that according to the writings, 2021 does not look great. So what do we have in store? Well, let's start with the undead apocalypse. In a hellscape scenario coming straight out of the film I Am Legend, an apparently Russian scientist is predicted to create a biological weapon, turning us all into zombies and driving humanity extinct. And if the zombies don't get us, a famine unlike anything we've ever seen apparently will. This in reference to the second tragic prophecy that the coronavirus pandemic will only lead to greater misfortunes, signaling the end of the world. Then in yet another cataclysmic divination, the quatrain "In the sky, one sees fire and a long trail of sparks" has been interpreted to refer to an asteroid either heating up or even smashing into the Earth. And NASA scientists, for their part, are announcing that in fact, an asteroid called 2009 KF1 really does have the chance to hit Earth in May of 2021, with 15 times the power of the nuclear bomb used over Hiroshima in 1945. Meanwhile, other terrifying realities predicted by the 16th century philosopher include robots rising up to take over the world, a possible World War III breaking out in the Middle East, an economic collapse, and severe climate changes including dramatically rising sea levels, earthquakes in California, and harmful solar storms. All that said, remember to of course take all of these predictions with a large heaping of salt. Skeptics consistently pointing out how many, if not most, of Nostradamus' predictions are simply misinterpretations, retroactively refitted or adjusted to fit certain events. And with that, let's now take a look at the predictions for the weather. Tonight, you can expect clear skies and cool temperatures, averaging for a low of about 51 Fahrenheit or 11 degrees Celsius. And then tomorrow, you can expect another sunny day, highs remaining at around 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius. And now, of course, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Here we see the most touching thing you can imagine. No, not the dog, of course. We're talking about a lone soldier who has not seen his mother in a year and a half, and this is their reuniting. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.22 shekels to the American dollar and 2.51 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Then don't forget to visit the all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and let us know what you think. Just don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates while you're there. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.